Welcome to Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborne. And on this podcast, we interview successful business owners for them to share atomic, impactful lessons that they've learned throughout the course of their business and share them with us so that we can learn from them. As always, this show is by the LinkedIn reverse podcast method, the new way to close deals that doesn't rely on any of the old traditional methods that everybody hates. We use this method to book 26 qualified leads calls in 10 days with ad spend, outreach, or endless social media posting. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborne. And the link to that will be in the show notes below. But on today's guest, we have Steve Lowy. He's the owner of AES and the Residence Apartments, and they provide corporate housing as well as study abroad organizations specializing in working with U.S. colleges and their students. So, Steve, thanks so much for being on the show today. And I want to start off by asking a question I always start off by asking, which I love, which is this: if you somehow were able to have a time machine and go back to when you started your very first business, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
Well, firstly, howdy, Jason.
Hey.
Thank you for inviting me on this. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I struggled with at the beginning was getting, I guess, too emotional, too passionate about everything that I did and doing everything at 100% or 110%. I've toned it down to like 90 to 100%. But I think not taking things too personally when things go right or wrong, I think is definitely something I would have taken on board earlier in my career.
Yeah. It's a really good point. When what have you learned on how to manage that? Because I think particularly when we start up our own businesses, it's our baby, isn't it? It's like our thing, and it could be all the way from people saying no, and so we take that really personal. Like, why wouldn't someone want to work with me? Or it could be from, having team that just don't do things, or maybe you don't feel like they are necessarily. I don't know if respecting is the right word for it, but it can just take personal. You think everyone will be on board with what I do. So what are those things that you've learned on how to manage that side of things? Because I see that hold a lot of business owners back in a lot of ways, whether they're well established or whether they're new in business.
I think with the stuff I've worked in, it's generally been hospitality and or education, where you're dealing with a lot of people, both in terms of your own team, but also a
Mm.
lot of customers. When I was running hotels and hostels, we were looking after two or three hundred people a day, in one go. And so over a year, that's thousands and thousands of customers. So I think it's trying to be human. And I found
Yeah.
when I created my first hotel brand, Umi Hotels, back in mid 2000s, I just did it, on the fly in terms of how a brand should be built. I then hired a few staff members who'd come from big brands, and actually their big brand culture didn't fit in with our brand culture because ultimately we were
Mm.
more human. I was employing personality rather than CV. I wasn't asking people to read a 200-page, brand manual. And so I think
Yeah.
that whole being human is a really big part. And I think with all the technology out there today, the more human you can be in a people business, the more important it is for people to buy in. Maybe not to the extent that you do emotionally,
Mm.
but enough to still feel part of a brand, part of a family, part of a bigger thing. And I think
Yeah.
I didn't realize how important that was probably until after I've always did it, but I just didn't realize how important it was. And about 5 years into running the hotels, I never had used a recruitment company or a recruiter,
Right.
and I didn't realize other hotels did. And so the amount of money we would have saved on recruitment was huge because we built our own demand for working with us and therefore helping our customers and helping our brand. So I think that is really important. And I think
Mm.
it's lost sometimes in businesses today.
Yeah. I love what you said around that. When you look at the culture side of it, building your own brand, what are some of the lessons you learned in that? Maybe some of the mistakes you've made as well, because I think every business owner thinks they're creating a brand or a culture within the business, but sometimes they may not actually realize that what they think they're building isn't what the actual culture is underneath the surface. What have you learned that has helped you build the successful brand and culture you've wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I think having some true meaning, and this is not in a overly marketing spiel way, but like, having a true meaning of what you're standing for in a really simple
Yeah.
manner is important. And I think it's not necessarily the logo; it's really what's behind it, which is normally people in our sector.
Yeah.
Obviously, in a tech business, it's more product, but ultimately for us, it's people. And so understanding what your brand identity is as the founder, as the leader, but also your team, and therefore hiring people to match the brand per se is really
Mm.
important. And it can be really simple things. We 20 years ago had a sustainability policy, very simple stuff, but people really liked it. People resonated with it,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
we weren't wearing hemp uh, outfits to save the planet, but we did little bits along the way, and I think that's really important. I think keeping it pretty simple. I think the Umi Hotel is the meaning is simple, which means ocean in Japanese, and it was a brand to connect the world. Really easy. The logo just became too complicated. It was a lovely
Okay.
idea, but then the first website we tried to break boundaries, and it was totally unusable. And then as we went on, functionality and everything else was important. With AES, it was we rebranded for our 50-year anniversary. It was a family business, and we updated the brand, and it was very important to have a balance between history and great reputation, but also modernizing what we looked and what we were about. And that was actually very subtle because ultimately there's a lot of people who worked in the organization for a long time who still believed in what we did, but maybe didn't have a badge, a stamp that resonated with them. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's a more of a B2B brand. So I think also is understanding whether you're B2B or B2C, or in our case with the study abroad side, B2B2C, uh, what really works, both in terms of messaging, stamp, but also making sure it's consistent underneath in terms of people knowing what you're working towards. And that is again probably going back to initially being human and
Yeah.
honest internally. But yeah, I think keeping it simple messaging, outbound and inbound, and yeah, not overcomplicating things like a website or the e-commerce side of what you do or whatever
Mm.
to make sure you deliver ultimately a business that generates revenue rather than focusing on the flashy things.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. But one of the things you said earlier as well is that trust. There's a lot of trust with technology, or sorry, there's a lot of lack of trust now with new technology, and I definitely see that across the board in lots of industries. But it's intriguing because since you are in a very much hospitality aspect, which I would assume there's a lot more face-to-face interaction and hospitality. What are the things you're seeing with lack of trust with new technology and AI that you guys are trying to mitigate to maintain that level of trust within the hospitality side of things that you guys do?
Well, I think we've got some quite competing forces, particularly in the UK, over the last the current government or administration for the American audience. And I don't think intentionally, but unintentionally have put huge amount of strain on the hospitality sector, hospitality education or private education that we do through employment taxes, through council tax. It was huge amounts. I mean, we're talking a 40% increase in our cost in the last 9 months. I mean, it's
Wow.
a lot. One of the things that's been particularly targeted is stuff like national insurance and and so forth, where in theory it's better for us to have less staff at the moment, but at the same time, our brand is famous for delivering amazingly personal service.
Yeah.
Where I think the trust bit is and where we win sometimes in terms of new clients or really good feedback. And for the residents apartments, the corporate housing bit, we work in really big brands to relocate their staff to London. the speed of feedback is really important. Now, technology can feed back quicker, but it may not give you the answer. So there's amazing AI chatbots, but I think everyone on here will have had a frustrating experience with a chatbot where you get to a point after 5 minutes where it says, "Oh, let me transfer you to a live agent. Oh, sorry, there's no live agent available."
Yeah.
We have a phone
Yeah.
number. We have a 24-hour duty management service. People can phone up and speak to a human. If they don't speak to a human directly, we get their phone number and we can phone them back.
Wow.
So that conflicts with the actual an AI chatbot, which would save us money.
Yeah.
But my thing from a long-term perspective, if you can answer those queries, a leak, can't get into the apartment, booking, that actually the win of that extra tax is greater than the saving on the AI chatbot. And I think that's where that trust bit is.
Mm.
I also think when we're dealing with individual students coming over for programs, we occasionally get phone calls or emails from parents. They want to hear or speak to a human. They don't want a chatbot. They're investing good money to come over. It might be the first time a child has been away from their parents,
Yeah.
a different country, living with others, but on their own per se, and I
Yeah.
think those sort of things is where humans still win. And I think that's where it is. The other thing, which is a little bit more of an ethical thing, is how so we deliver academics for students and probably
Okay.
teach over 1,000 students a year, is how you can teach people things that AI can't. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that is a challenge for all education, particularly higher education. Um, we're lucky. It's international students coming to normally a city for the first time. 50% of our classes are not in a classroom. They're out in London, guest speakers, site visits, walking tours, and all the stuff that you learn by doing.
Yeah.
But I think that's become a challenge in terms of assignments, um, feedback, and so forth. So yeah, I think that trust bit is also in terms of teaching, and that's quite a challenge.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I love what you're saying around y- it feels maybe in some way to other people that you've sacrificed some profitability, but actually the long-term relationship that you're building and the credibility and trust, pays dividends over the long term. And I just love your perspective on that. Well, if you look over the next 2 to 3 years, what are your goals? What are you looking to do with the different businesses you have?
So we are launching our first apart hotel as part of the residence brand. It's going to be called Jitaku, which means one's home in Japanese. Um, and it's a conversion of an old, pretty ugly 70s office block into a short stay apartment building right in the city of London. Uh, that's really exciting. There is a demand for offices still, but it's more larger, grade one, top tier offices with all the bells and whistles. There's other office blocks that are sitting empty, and our brand is to reuse those with a really spacious living experience that you can have, from one night, but really ideally a week or 2 weeks for project work or family holidays. So that's
Yeah.
really exciting. So that's launching in spring Q1 next year. From an academic perspective, we've noticed a demand for postgraduate opportunities for US students looking to
Okay.
maybe get a longer work experience or postgraduate education in the UK. So we're looking at developing that product, which will be the AES Career Accelerator, which is really exciting. We hope to do that in
Nice.
Q1 next year. And also looking at different destinations around the UK to do what would ultimately be more cost-effective study abroad solutions rather than being in London. And so next summer we'll have our first program in Manchester in conjunction with the University of Salford. So
Nice.
those sort of things I think will set us up for the next 2 or 3 years, because particularly in the student side, and a good idea can take 2 or 3 years to become live. Salford I've had
Yeah.
in my mind for a while, but we've got a great new guy called Craig who's been helping me drive that side of what we do. And we're going to be focusing on media and like sports management, sports science, and using Manchester as a
Yeah.
base. And then hopefully grow a bit in the north of England, maybe Leeds.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we've certainly got interest in Sheffield and Liverpool, and actually giving students from America, from Texas, an opportunity not just to do London, but actually to see the UK. And
That's
that's
amazing.
a bit of a drive for us going forward. And finally is looking at new markets. So um, we've got some work being done at the moment in India to see whether there are models that could work based off what we do at the moment to actually start doing it in India. So that's
Wow.
pretty interesting.
That is exciting. Wow, that's very cool. Nice. Well, Steve, for people that are looking to learn more about what you do, get in touch, what's the best places for them to find you?
The best really is my LinkedIn profiles, which is Steve Lowy or Stephen with a PH. The reason why I've put that on my LinkedIn profile is I wrote a book earlier this year about the power of youth travel,
Okay.
and my late mother always called me Stephen, and my wife calls me Stephen when I'm in trouble. So I thought I'd go back to my birth name rather than the nickname I've had since I was about 3 as Steve. So yeah, Stephen Lowy, and then yes, our website is angloeducational.com for the student side, and the residenceapartments.com for the corporate housing side. So happy for people to connect on LinkedIn.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I definitely recommend everyone checking out the different links that Steve just shared there. And Steve, thank you so much for being on the show. Really great bits of wisdom and insight that you gave on the show today. So thank you so much for that. And as a reminder for everyone listening, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way to close deals that doesn't rely on any of the old traditional methods that everybody hates. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn, have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborne. The link to that will be in the show notes below. And until next episode, stay inspired.